Ashenmere Forever. Lady Eleanor of Winthorne had once believed Sir Tristan de Warwick was her destiny, until war stole him away. Now, on the eve of her wedding to another, he stood in the Camelot Hall, his voice rough with something unspoken. "Did you ever wait for me, Eleanor?" he murmured. "Or did you pray I would never return?" Chapter 1. The Ghost of a Vow. The beeswax candles sputtered, casting flickering shadows across the tapestry-laden walls of Winthorne's great hall. The air, thick with the scent of roasted boar and spiced wine, did little to settle the tremor in Lady Eleanor's hands. Tonight, on the eve of her betrothal feast to Lord Beaumont, a ghost had walked through the oaken doors, a ghost clad in worn leather and steel, with eyes the color of a stormy winter sky. Sir Tristan de Warwick. 10 years. 10 years since she had last seen him, since the king's banner had called him to war, leaving her with nothing but a whispered promise and a silver ring etched with a falcon in flight. 10 years she had waited, the ring growing cold against her skin, the promise fading like an old, forgotten song. 10 years, until the whispers had turned to pronouncements of his death, lost on some distant, blood-soaked battlefield. Now, here he stood, larger than life, the boyish charm replaced by a hardened jaw and lines etched deep around his eyes. He moved with the grace of a seasoned warrior, the subtle clink of mail hidden beneath his travel-stained tunic a constant reminder of the life he had led, the life that had stolen him from her. The hall had fallen silent, the celebratory music dying a strangled death. Lord Beaumont, a man of stout build and even stouter pride, stiffened beside Eleanor, his hand tightening possessively on her arm. The assembled guests, a collection of nobles from across the realm, watched with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. A return knight, presumed dead, interrupting a betrothal feast. It was the stuff of ballads, of whispered rumors and courtly intrigue. Tristan stopped before the dais, his gaze fixed on Eleanor. It wasn't the adoring gaze of the young knight who had sworn his heart to her. This gaze was different. Searching, questioning, perhaps even accusing. The years had changed him, carved away the softness, leaving behind a man she no longer knew, a stranger wearing the face of her lost love. "My Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very stones of the hall. It held a roughness, a weariness, that sent a shiver down her spine. "I have returned." It was a statement of the obvious, yet the weight of those 3 words pressed down on Eleanor, suffocating her. Returned. But to what? To whom? The girl he had left behind was gone, replaced by a woman hardened by loss and resignation, a woman on the verge of marrying another. Lord Beaumont cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the sudden quiet. "Sir Tristan," he said, his voice tight with barely suppressed anger. "We had heard rumors of your demise. We mourn your hardships. But you see, Lady Eleanor is to be my wife." Tristan's gaze flickered to Beaumont, a flicker of something dark and unreadable in his eyes, before returning to Eleanor. He didn't speak for a long moment, the silence stretching, taut and unbearable. The only sound was the crackling of the fire in the massive hearth and the frantic beat of Eleanor's own heart. Then he spoke, his voice low and laced with a pain that mirrored the ache in her own chest. "Did you ever wait for me, Eleanor?" he murmured, the question a whispered blade twisting in the silence. "Or did you pray I would never return?" The question hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Her fingers, still entwined with Beaumont's, felt cold and clammy. How could she answer? How could she explain the years of agonizing waiting, the slow, agonizing death of hope, the eventual acceptance of a life without him? How could she confess that, yes, there had been moments, dark and desperate, when she had wished for the finality of his death rather than the endless torment of uncertainty? She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The truth was a tangled knot of guilt, regret, and a love that had withered but refused to fully die. She looked at Tristan, at the lines of pain etched around his mouth, at the haunted look in his eyes, and saw not just the ghost of her past, but a reflection of her own fractured soul. Beaumont, sensing her hesitation, tightened his grip on her arm. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a sharp warning. She pulled her hand away, the sudden movement breaking the spell that had held them all captive. She had to speak, had to defend herself, had to what?
Lie?
Confess?
She didn't know.
"Tristan," she began, her voice trembling. Before she could finish, a commotion erupted at the entrance of the hall. A breathless messenger, his face pale and streaked with dirt, burst through the doors, shouting, "My Lord Beaumont. Riders. A raiding party, they're attacking the western border." The news shattered the tense silence like a dropped goblet. Chaos erupted. Men shouted orders, women screamed, and the hall, moments before a scene of strained civility, became a maelstrom of fear and confusion. Beaumont, his face now flushed with anger and a flicker of fear, turned to his captain of the guard.
"Assemble the men.
Ride to meet them. Protect the border." The captain bowed and rushed out, his men following close behind. Beaumont turned back to Eleanor, his eyes filled with a mixture of apology and urgency. "My lady, I must go. This changes everything." He looked at Tristan, a hard glint in his eyes. "Sir Tristan, you are welcome to stay at Winthorn as our guest. But I trust you will understand that my duty lies elsewhere." Tristan nodded, his face unreadable. "I understand, my lord." Beaumont leaned down and kissed Eleanor's hand, a perfunctory gesture devoid of warmth. "I will return as soon as I am able," he said, his voice tight with a possessiveness that grated on Eleanor's nerves. Then, he was gone, swept away by the tide of urgent preparations. Eleanor was left standing alone on the dais, the scent of roasted boar and spiced wine now mingled with the acrid smell of fear. She looked at Tristan, who still stood silently watching her, his eyes like dark pools reflecting the flickering candlelight. He hadn't answered her, hadn't told her why he had returned, what he wanted, what he expected. And now, with Beaumont gone and the threat of war looming, she was left alone with the ghost of her past, a past that had suddenly, violently, collided with her present. The falcon ring, hidden beneath her gown, felt heavy against her skin, a silent testament to a broken vow and a love that refused to stay buried. The night, it seemed, was far from over. Chapter 2. Shadows in the Great Hall. The chaos subsided, leaving an unsettling quiet in its wake. The remnants of the feast lay scattered, a stark contrast to the earlier merriment. The guests, their faces etched with worry and uncertainty, had dispersed to their chambers, leaving Eleanor and Tristan alone in the vast, echoing hall. The only sounds were the crackling fire and the distant, muffled shouts of men preparing for battle. Eleanor felt a chill creep through her, despite the warmth of the hearth. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the feeling of vulnerability that washed over her. Tristan still stood where he had left him, a silent, imposing figure amidst the disordered finery. He seemed to be studying her, his gaze intense and unwavering, making her feel exposed, like a specimen pinned under a magnifying glass. "Why, Tristan?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question had been burning in her since he had first spoken, a relentless flame consuming her composure. "Why have you returned? After all these years, after we were told you were dead." He took a step closer, the movement slow and deliberate. The flickering candlelight danced across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the dark hollows beneath his eyes. He looked weary, older than his years, as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. "I was not dead," he said, his voice rough, like stones grinding together, "though I have walked through the valley of its shadow many times." He paused, his gaze drifting towards the darkened windows, as if seeing something beyond the walls of Winthorn, something that haunted his dreams. "I was captured," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "held prisoner by the Saracens. For years, I endured things you cannot imagine." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. She had heard tales of the Saracens, of their fierce warriors and their brutal treatment of prisoners. She had imagined Tristan dead, a swift, clean death on the battlefield. The reality, she realized, was far more cruel. I am so sorry, Tristan, she said, her voice choked with emotion. The words felt inadequate, a paltry offering in the face of the suffering he must have endured. He turned back to her, his eyes locking onto hers. There were times, he said, his voice raw with emotion, when I thought I would never see Winthorn again. Never see you. The unspoken words hung between them, heavy with the weight of lost years and shattered dreams. Eleanor felt a familiar ache in her chest, the ghost of a love that she had tried so hard to bury. But you escaped, she said, stating the obvious. He nodded. With the help of others. It was a long and arduous journey. I faced many dangers, many setbacks. He paused, then added, his voice laced with a bitterness that made her shiver. Not all oaths are kept, Eleanor. Not all loyalties are true. The statement, cryptic as it was, sent a chill down her spine. It spoke of betrayal, of a darkness that went beyond the horrors of captivity. It hinted at a story far more complex than she had initially imagined. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling. He hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. Then he shook his head. It is a long story, my lady, one that is not easily told, and perhaps not one you wish to hear. He looked at her, his eyes searching, questioning. He was testing her, she realized, trying to gauge her reaction, her willingness to delve into the darkness of his past. I want to understand, she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. I want to know what happened to you, Tristan. What changed you? He studied her for a long moment, the silence stretching between them. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls, making the tapestries seem to come alive. The scent of beeswax and stale wine mingled with the faint, lingering scent of leather and steel that clung to Tristan's clothes, a constant reminder of the warrior he had become. Finally, he sighed, a deep, weary sound. Very well, Eleanor, he said. But know this, the truth is often a bitter draught to swallow. And some wounds never truly heal. He gestured towards a pair of high-backed chairs near the hearth.
Come, he said. Seat.
And I will tell you the story of my lost years. Eleanor hesitated for a moment, a sense of foreboding washing over her. She knew, instinctively, that his story would change everything. It would shatter the fragile peace she had built for herself, forcing her to confront the ghosts of her past and the uncertain future that lay ahead. But she also knew that she could not turn away. She had to hear his story, had to understand the man he had become. She nodded, her heart pounding in her chest, and walked towards the chairs, the rustle of her silk gown the only sound in the otherwise silent hall. As she sat down, she met Tristan's gaze and saw a flicker of something in his eyes of vulnerability, a plea for understanding that mirrored her own. The shadows in the great hall seemed to deepen, drawing them both into a world of secrets, betrayals, and a love that had somehow survived the ravages of time and war. The night had just begun. Chapter 3. The Falcon's Flight. The fire crackled merrily, casting a warm, flickering glow on Tristan's face, illuminating the lines of hardship and the glint of steel in his eyes. He leaned forward, his hands clasped together, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames, as if drawing strength from their primal energy. The battle, he began, his voice low and measured, was a massacre. We were outnumbered, outmaneuvered. The king's forces were scattered, broken. I fought until my sword was stained red and my arm ached with the effort. But it was no use. Eleanor listened, her heart aching with each word. She could picture him, young and valiant, fighting against impossible odds, the falcon on his shield a symbol of hope amidst the carnage. I saw men fall around me, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. Friends, brothers in arms, cut down like wheat before the scythe. I was struck from behind. I remember falling, the world spinning, the taste of blood and dirt in my mouth. He paused, taking a deep breath, as if struggling to control the memories that threatened to overwhelm him. When I awoke, I was a prisoner, bound and gagged, surrounded by the enemy. They were not merciful. They took pleasure in our suffering, in our humiliation. Eleanor reached out, her hand instinctively reaching for his, but she stopped short, her fingers hovering inches from his. She didn't know if he would welcome her touch, if he would recoil from it. He didn't seem to notice, his gaze still fixed on the fire. They took us across the sea, he said, to a land of scorching sun and endless desert. A land where the laws of God and man held no sway. He described the brutal journey, the starvation, the thirst, the constant fear of death. He spoke of the cruelty of their captors, of the tortures they inflicted, both physical and mental. He spoke of the despair that threatened to consume him, the temptation to give up, to welcome the sweet release of oblivion. But there was something, he said, his voice gaining strength, that kept me going. A flicker of hope, a memory of home, of Winthorn,
Of you.
He finally looked at her, his eyes meeting hers. And in that gaze, Eleanor saw a glimpse of the young knight she had loved, the man who had sworn his heart to her beneath the ancient oak tree. I made a vow, he said, his voice firm. A vow to survive. A vow to return. A vow to see you again. He described his years of captivity, the endless toil, the constant struggle for survival. He learned their language, their customs, their ways of war. He learned to be cunning, to be resourceful, to be ruthless. I had to become someone else, he said, his voice tinged with regret. Someone I barely recognized. I had to do things I am not proud of, but I did them to survive.
To keep my vow.
He spoke of his escape, a daring plan hatched with the help of a fellow prisoner, a disgraced knight from a rival kingdom. They had risked everything, their lives hanging by a thread.
We stole horses, he said.
Rode for days through the desert, pursued by our captors. We fought, we killed, we survived. He described their journey back to Christendom, the dangers they faced, the hardships they endured. He spoke of betrayal, of treachery, of the realization that the world was not as black and white as he had once believed. The oath he'd held so dear had been twisted. The knight who helped me escape, Tristan explained, his jaw clenched, Sir Gareth of Lyonesse, he was not who he seemed. He had his own agenda, his own secrets.
He used me.
He paused, his eyes clouding over with a mixture of anger and pain. He was involved in a plot, a conspiracy against the king. He intended to use my return, my story, to further his own ambitions. It became clear. The oath. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. The story was becoming more complex, more dangerous, with each passing moment. And you stopped him? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tristan nodded. I had to. I had no choice. I killed him. The words hung in the air, heavy and stark. Eleanor looked at him, at the man who had returned from the dead, a man who had endured unimaginable horrors, a man who had killed to protect his king, his country, his honor. He looked back at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain, regret, and a desperate plea for understanding. I am not the man I was, Eleanor, he said, his voice raw with emotion. I have seen too much, done too much. I am stained. The fire had burned low, the embers glowing red like the eyes of a watchful beast. The shadows in the hall seemed to deepen, closing in around them. The falcon ring, hidden beneath Eleanor's gown, felt like a burning brand against her skin. The falcon had flown, soared through the darkness, and returned, bearing the scars of its journey. And Eleanor knew that her own journey, her own flight, was just beginning. She was no longer certain of anything, only of the tangled, dangerous path that lay before them. Chapter 4. A Tapestry of Lies. The silence that followed Tristan's confession was thick with unspoken emotions. Eleanor sat, her mind reeling from the weight of his revelations. He had returned, not as the triumphant knight of her dreams, but as a scarred and haunted man, burdened by secrets and the blood of a fellow knight. The tapestry of their shared past, once vibrant with youthful hope, was now interwoven with threads of darkness and deceit. Stained, she repeated softly, the word echoing the turmoil in her heart. You say you are stained, Tristan, but you did what you had to do. To survive. To protect the king. He looked at her, his eyes searching, questioning. He seemed to be seeking reassurance, absolution, something she wasn't sure she could give. It is not so simple, Eleanor, he said, his voice heavy with regret. There are consequences. Gareth's family, they are powerful. They will seek revenge. Eleanor felt a shiver of fear. She knew the intricacies of noble feuds, the endless cycle of vengeance that could consume families and kingdoms. And the conspiracy? She asked. Gareth's plot, was it just him? Or were there others involved? Tristan hesitated, his gaze drifting towards the darkened windows. There were others, he said quietly. Powerful men, close to the king. Men who seek to control him, to manipulate him for their own gain. He wouldn't meet her eyes, and Eleanor sensed he was holding something back, a crucial piece of the puzzle that he was reluctant to reveal. Who, Tristan? She pressed, her voice firm. You must tell me. If there is danger, we must be prepared. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a conflict that mirrored her own. He was torn between his loyalty to the king, his desire to protect her, and the fear of revealing a truth that could shatter the fragile peace of Winthorn. I cannot say, he finally said, his voice strained. Not yet. I need proof. Evidence that cannot be refuted. Otherwise, it is my word against theirs, and they are influential. Eleanor understood his caution. Accusing a powerful noble without proof was a dangerous game, one that could easily backfire. But her intuition told her that there was more to his reluctance than mere prudence. Tristan, she said, her voice softening. You can trust me. You know you can. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a longing that made her heart ache. He wanted to trust her, she realized, but the years of captivity, of betrayal, had left him wary, suspicious. I want to, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I have learned that trust is a fragile thing, Eleanor. Easily broken, easily betrayed. He reached out, his hand hovering over hers, just as she had done earlier. This time, she didn't hesitate. She placed her hand in his, her fingers intertwining with his. His hand was calloused and rough, a testament to the hardships he had endured, but his touch was gentle, hesitant. We all have our scars, Tristan, she said, her voice trembling. Yours may be more visible, but mine are no less real. She told him about the years of waiting, the agonizing uncertainty, the slow, painful death of hope. She told him about the pressure to marry, the expectations of her family, the eventual acceptance of a life without him. She told him about Lord Beaumont, about her reluctant agreement to the betrothal, a decision driven by duty and a desperate need for security. I never stopped loving you, Tristan, she confessed, her voice choked with emotion. But I learned to live without you. I had to. He squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and understanding. I know, he said softly. And I do not blame you, Eleanor. You did what you had to do. He paused, then added, his voice laced with a hint of bitterness. Perhaps it would have been better if I had not returned. If I had remained a ghost, a memory. No, she said fiercely. Don't say that. You are here now, Tristan. And we will face whatever comes together. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a newfound determination. She might not know the full extent of the danger they faced, but she knew one thing. She would not abandon him again. She would stand by him, fight for him, even if it meant defying her family, her betrothed, the entire kingdom. The fire had burned down to embers, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The tapestry of their lives was being rewoven, thread by thread, a new pattern emerging from the ashes of the old. And Eleanor knew that this new tapestry, though stained with darkness and deceit, would also be woven with courage, loyalty, and a love that had defied death itself. It had to be. Chapter 5. Whispers in the Cloisters. The dawn crept in, gray and somber, mirroring the unease that settled over Winthorn. The news of the border raid, coupled with Tristan's unexpected return, had cast a pall of uncertainty over the castle. Eleanor, after a restless night spent replaying Tristan's harrowing tale, found herself drawn to the quiet solitude of the chapel. The air within the stone walls was cool and still, scented with incense and the faint, lingering aroma of beeswax from the countless candles that had burned through the night. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, depicting scenes of saints and martyrs, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the muted gray of the stone. Eleanor knelt before the altar, her hands clasped in prayer, but her mind was far from tranquil. She sought solace, guidance, but the words felt hollow, her faith shaken by the events of the past night. She prayed for Tristan, for his safety, for his soul. She prayed for Winthorn, for its protection from the looming threat of war. And she prayed for herself, for the strength to face the difficult choices that lay ahead. A soft footfall behind her broke her reverie. She turned to see a figure emerge from the shadows, Mother Agnes, the abbess of the nearby convent, a woman known for her wisdom, her piety, and her discretion. Mother Agnes had been a confidant of Eleanor's mother, and Eleanor herself had often sought her counsel in times of trouble. "My child," Mother Agnes said, her voice soft and soothing, "you seem troubled." Eleanor rose and curtsied. "Mother Agnes, I am." The abbess gestured towards a small, secluded alcove, hidden behind a pillar. "Come," she said. "Let us speak in private." They sat on a stone bench, the silence of the chapel amplifying the intimacy of their conversation. Eleanor, hesitant at first, poured out her heart to the abbess, recounting Tristan's return, his story of captivity and betrayal, and the dangerous conspiracy that threatened the king. Mother Agnes listened patiently, her expression calm and serene, her eyes filled with a deep understanding that went beyond mere sympathy. "These are troubled times, my child," she said when Eleanor had finished. "The world is full of darkness, of treachery. But there is also light, also goodness. You must hold on to that." "I try, Mother," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. But I am afraid. For Tristan, for myself, for everything." "Fear is a natural emotion, my child," the abbess said. "But it must not control you. You must be strong, Eleanor. For yourself, and for the man you love." The words struck a chord within Eleanor. Love. Yes, she still loved Tristan, despite everything. But it was a different kind of love now, tempered by loss, by hardship, by the knowledge of the darkness that he carried within him. "He says he is stained, Mother," Eleanor said, her voice choked with emotion. "That he has done things, terrible things." "We all carry our burdens, my child," Mother Agnes said. "Some are heavier than others. But it is not the weight of the burden that defines us, but how we choose to carry it." She reached out and took Eleanor's hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "Tristan has returned to you, Eleanor," she said. "That is a sign of hope, a sign of redemption." "But the conspiracy," Eleanor said. "The danger, he says he cannot reveal the names of those involved without proof." Mother Agnes nodded. "He is wise to be cautious. These are powerful men, with much to lose. But there are ways to find the truth, Eleanor. Ways that are less direct." She paused, her gaze drifting towards the stained glass windows, as if seeking inspiration from the depicted saints. "There are whispers," she said quietly. "Whispers in the cloisters, in the marketplaces, in the taverns. Secrets that are hidden, but not forgotten. You must listen, Eleanor. Listen carefully. And you must trust your instincts." She looked at Eleanor, her eyes filled with a knowing look. "There are those who can help you, Eleanor," she said. "Those who are loyal to the king, who seek to expose the truth. But you must be careful. You must trust no one completely." She gave Eleanor the name of a trusted scribe, known for their loyalty and vast network of contacts. A seemingly harmless connection, but one that may hold the key. Eleanor felt a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. Mother Agnes' words had given her a direction, a path to follow. She might not know the full extent of the conspiracy, but she was no longer alone. She had a friend, a confidant, and a glimmer of hope. As she left the chapel, the sunlight seemed a little brighter, the air a little less heavy. The whispers in the cloisters, the secrets hidden in the shadows, no longer seemed so daunting. She had a task, a purpose, and she would not rest until she had uncovered the truth, protected Tristan, and then found a way to reclaim the love that had been stolen from her for so long. She would listen, observe, and act, navigating the treacherous currents of courtly intrigue with the quiet strength of a woman who had nothing left to lose. The fate of a kingdom, and her own, rested on it. Chapter 6. The Price of Honor. The days following Beaumont's departure were filled with a tense, watchful quiet. The raid on the western border had been repelled, but the threat of further attacks remained, casting a long shadow over Winthorn. Eleanor, following Mother Agnes' advice, began her own quiet investigation, listening to the whispers, observing the interactions of the castle's inhabitants, searching for any clue that might shed light on the conspiracy Tristan had spoken of. She found herself drawn to the castle library, a vast, dusty chamber filled with ancient tomes and scrolls. It was a place of solitude, a refuge from the prying eyes and gossiping tongues of the court. She spent hours poring over chronicles, histories, and legal documents, searching for any mention of Gareth of Lyonesse, for any hint of his involvement in past intrigues. She also sought out the scribe Mother Agnes had recommended, Master Thomas, a wizened old man with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. He was known for his discretion, his loyalty to the crown, and his extensive network of informants, who spanned from the lowest taverns to the highest echelons of the court. She met with him in secret, in a small, secluded chamber within the library, the only light coming from a single, flickering candle. She told him Tristan's story, omitting only the names of the suspected conspirators, and asked for his help in uncovering the truth. Master Thomas listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration, his fingers tracing the lines of an ancient scroll. "This is a dangerous game, my lady," he said when she had finished. "These are powerful men you are dealing with. They will not hesitate to silence anyone who threatens them." "I know the risks, Master Thomas," Eleanor said. "But I must do this. For Tristan, for the king, for the realm." He nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Very well, my lady," he said. "I will help you. But you must be careful. Trust no one completely. Even those who seem to be your allies may have their own agendas." He promised to make inquiries, to tap into his network of informants, to gather any information that might be relevant to the conspiracy. He also gave her a small, silver whistle, shaped like a falcon, a symbol of their secret alliance. "If you are ever in danger, my lady," he said, "blow this whistle. My men will come to your aid." Eleanor took the whistle, her fingers closing around it tightly. It was a small, fragile object, but it represented a lifeline, a symbol of hope in a world of darkness and deceit. Meanwhile, Tristan, recovered from his travels and the initial shock of his return, began to take on a more active role in the defense of Winthorn. He drilled the remaining guards, inspected the fortifications, and offered his expertise to the castle steward, a gruff but competent man named Sir Reginald. Eleanor observed him from afar, watching him move with the grace and confidence of a seasoned warrior, his presence a source of reassurance to the castle's inhabitants. She saw the respect in the eyes of the men, the admiration in the glances of the women. But she also saw the shadows that still haunted him, the moments when his gaze would drift towards the horizon, his expression clouded with pain and regret. They met in secret, whenever they could, stealing moments together in the quiet corners of the castle, the gardens, the library. They spoke of their past, of their lost years, of their uncertain future. "I fear for you, Eleanor," Tristan said one evening, as they stood together on the castle walls, watching the sun set over the distant hills. This investigation you are undertaking, it is dangerous. I do not want you to be harmed." "I am not afraid," Tristan, Eleanor said, her voice firm. "I will not be intimidated. I will not be silenced." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and concern. "You are braver than you know, Eleanor," he said softly, "and more beautiful than ever." He reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of her jawline. It was a gentle, tender touch, a reminder of the passion that had once burned between them, a passion that still flickered, despite the years of separation and the darkness that surrounded them. Eleanor leaned into his touch, her heart aching with a longing that she had tried so hard to suppress. She wanted to believe that they could have a future together, that they could overcome the obstacles that stood in their way. But she knew that it would not be easy. The price of honor, of loyalty, of love, was often high, and she was prepared to pay it, whatever the cost. But she also knew that he was slowly beginning to reveal small details to her, building that trust, and that the walls he'd put up were coming down bit by bit. It gave her hope, even though it was terrifying at the same time. The whispers were growing louder. Chapter 7. Beneath a Bleeding Moon. The full moon hung heavy in the sky, casting a pale, ethereal glow over Winthorn. It was a night for lovers, for whispered secrets and stolen kisses. But for Eleanor and Tristan, it was a night of tension, of apprehension, of waiting. Master Thomas had sent word, he had gathered information, fragments of whispers and rumors that pointed to a growing conspiracy, a web of deceit that reached deep into the heart of the kingdom. He had arranged a secret meeting in the ruins of an old abbey, a few miles outside the castle walls. It was a dangerous rendezvous, but a necessary one. Eleanor and Tristan rode out under the cover of darkness, their horses' hooves muffled by the soft earth. They were accompanied by two of Tristan's most trusted men, loyal soldiers who had served with him in the war and shared his captivity. They were silent, watchful, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords. The abbey was a crumbling shell, a testament to the ravages of time and war. Ivy clung to the broken walls, and the wind whistled through the empty arches, creating an eerie, mournful sound. The moon, partially obscured by clouds, cast long, dancing shadows, making the ruins seem alive, haunted by the ghosts of the past. Master Thomas was waiting for them, his face hidden in the shadows of a hooded cloak. He led them to a small, secluded chamber, hidden beneath the ruins, the only light coming from a single, flickering lantern. "I have news, my lady Sir Tristan," he said, his voice low and urgent. "But it is not good news." He spread out a map on a stone table, a map of the kingdom, marked with various symbols and annotations. "The conspiracy is more extensive than we initially feared," he said. "It involves several powerful nobles, men who are close to the king, men who control the flow of information, the movement of troops, the very treasury." He pointed to several names on the map, names that Eleanor recognized, names that sent a shiver of fear down her spine. Lord Beaumont's name was among them. "Beaumont?" Eleanor gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. But he is to be my husband." Master Thomas nodded grimly. "He is a key player, my lady. He seeks to use his marriage to you to gain control of Winthorn, its lands, its resources. He is a pawn in a larger game, a game of power and ambition." Tristan's face was a mask of fury. "I knew it," he growled. "I knew he was not to be trusted." "But there is more," Master Thomas said. "The conspiracy has a foreign connection. They are in league with the King of Northumbria, our sworn enemy. They plan to betray the king, to open the borders to invasion, to plunge the realm into chaos." The revelation was shocking, devastating. It was a betrayal on a grand scale, a plot that threatened to destroy everything Eleanor held dear. "We must warn the king," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. "We must expose them." "It is not so simple, my lady," Master Thomas said. "They have covered their tracks well. They control the flow of information. They have spies everywhere, even within the king's own court." He pointed to another name on the map, a name that made Eleanor's blood run cold. Sir Reginald, the castle steward, the man Tristan had trusted, the man who controlled the defenses of Winthorn. "Reginald?" Tristan said, his voice incredulous. But he has served Winthorn faithfully for years." "He is a master of deception, Sir Tristan," Master Thomas said. "He has played his part well. But his loyalty lies elsewhere." The implications were terrifying. Winthorn, their refuge, their stronghold, was compromised. They were surrounded by enemies, betrayed by those they had trusted. What do we do? Eleanor asked, her voice filled with despair. Tristan looked at her, his eyes filled with a fierce determination.
We fight, he said.
We expose them. We save the king. He turned to Master Thomas. Can you get a message to the king? He asked. A warning? Master Thomas shook his head. It is too risky. Their spies are everywhere. The message would be intercepted. Then we must go to him ourselves, Tristan said. We must ride to the capital, warn him in person. It is a long and dangerous journey, Sir Tristan, Master Thomas said. The roads are patrolled. You'll be hunted. I have faced worse, Tristan said, his voice grim. I will not stand by and watch my king be betrayed. I will not let this kingdom fall. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and apology. I am sorry, Eleanor, he said. I had hoped for a different life for us. A life of peace, of happiness. We will have that life, Tristan, Eleanor said, her voice firm. But first we must survive this. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. They were bound together, by love, by loyalty, by a shared destiny. The moon, now fully obscured by clouds, cast the ruins into darkness. But in the hearts of Eleanor and Tristan, a flame of hope still burned, a flame that would guide them through the darkness, a flame that would not be extinguished. The bleeding moon seemed a grim omen, a premonition of the trials to come, but they were ready. Or so they thought. Chapter 8. The Serpent's Kiss. The decision made, preparations for the perilous journey to the capital began in earnest, shrouded in utmost secrecy. Every servant, every guard, was suspect the very walls of Winthorne seemed to have ears. Eleanor, drawing on a strength she didn't know she possessed, orchestrated the clandestine arrangements, her mind sharp, her resolve unwavering. She secured provisions, discreetly gathered loyal men at arms who had served her father, and arranged for swift horses to be ready at a hidden postern gate. Tristan, meanwhile, focused on gathering irrefutable proof of the conspiracy. Master Thomas had provided him with a list of coded documents hidden within the castle's vast library, documents that allegedly contained the conspirators' signatures and detailed plans for the betrayal. Locating these documents, however, was like searching for a single grain of sand on a vast beach, made even more dangerous by the ever-present threat of Sir Reginald's watchful eyes. One evening, as Eleanor was overseeing the packing of supplies in a secluded storage room, a shadow fell across the doorway. She turned, her heart leaping into her throat, to see Sir Reginald standing there, his face unreadable in the dim light. "My lady," he said, his voice smooth and courteous. "What are you doing here? Is something amiss?" Eleanor forced a smile, trying to appear calm and unconcerned. "Just checking on the stores, Sir Reginald," she said. "Making sure we have enough provisions for the winter." He stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the barrels and crates, his gaze lingering on the neatly packed saddlebags. "You seem to be preparing for a journey, my lady," he said, his voice laced with a subtle hint of suspicion. Eleanor's mind raced. She had to be careful, had to deflect his suspicion. "Just a small hunting trip, Sir Reginald," she said. "A few of us are going to try and replenish the larder." He didn't reply for a moment, his eyes fixed on hers, as if trying to see through her facade. Then he smiled, a slow, chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, my lady," he said. "I understand. But be careful. The woods can be dangerous." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "And give my regards to Sir Tristan," he said, his voice dripping with a venomous undertone. "Tell him I look forward to seeing him again." He left, leaving Eleanor shaken and unnerved. His words, his smile, his knowledge of Tristan's involvement, all confirmed her worst fears. He knew. He was playing a deadly game of cat and mouse. She rushed to find Tristan, who was in the library, poring over ancient scrolls, his brow furrowed in concentration. She recounted her encounter with Sir Reginald, her voice trembling with fear. Tristan's face hardened, his eyes blazing with fury. "He knows," he said, his voice grim. "He is toying with us. He is waiting for the right moment to strike. We must leave, Tristan, Eleanor said. Tonight. We cannot wait any longer. He nodded. You are right. We have delayed too long. Gather the men. I will retrieve the documents. He turned back to the scrolls, his hands moving quickly, desperately searching for the coded messages that held the key to exposing the conspiracy. Eleanor rushed to the postern gate, where the horses were waiting, their breath misting in the cold night air. The loyal men at arms stood ready, their faces grim, their weapons drawn. As she waited for Tristan, a figure emerged from the shadows, Lord Beaumont. He was dressed in traveling clothes, his face pale and strained, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and fear. Eleanor, he said, his voice hoarse. What is going on? Where is Tristan? What are you doing? Eleanor's heart sank. His arrival was unexpected, a complication she hadn't anticipated. She had to think fast, had to lie. My lord, she said, forcing a calm she didn't feel. We were going to the capital. To seek an audience with the king.
Why?
He demanded. What is the meaning of this? There is a matter of great importance, Eleanor said, choosing her words carefully. A matter that concerns the safety of the realm. He looked at her, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. You are lying, Eleanor, he said. You are involved in something. Something treasonous. He reached out and grabbed her arm, his grip tight and painful. Tell me the truth, Eleanor, he demanded. Or I will have you arrested. Eleanor struggled against his grip, her mind racing. She couldn't tell him the truth, couldn't reveal Tristan's plan. But she couldn't lie either, not convincingly. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows behind Beaumont Tristan. He moved with the swiftness of a striking viper, his sword flashing in the moonlight. Let her go, Beaumont, he said, his voice cold and deadly. Beaumont turned, his eyes widening in surprise and fear. He released Eleanor's arm and drew his own sword, his hand trembling. Tristan, he said, his voice faltering. You dare to threaten me? I dare to defend my lady, Tristan said. And I dare to expose your treachery. Beaumont lunged at Tristan, his sword whistling through the air. Tristan parried the blow, his movements fluid and graceful, his eyes fixed on his opponent. The clash of steel echoed through the night, a deadly dance of death. This was it. The point of no return. The serpent's kiss had been delivered, and the venom was spreading. Eleanor could only watch, pray, and prepare to act as she watched the events unfold. Chapter 9. Scars of the Past. The duel was swift and brutal. Beaumont, though skilled with the blade, was no match for Tristan's battle-hardened prowess. Years of captivity and constant struggle had honed Tristan's skills to a razor's edge, transforming him into a formidable warrior. He moved with a deadly grace, parrying Beaumont's attacks with ease, his eyes cold and focused, his every movement calculated to inflict maximum damage. Eleanor watched, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to beg them to stop, but she knew it was futile. This was a fight to the death, a reckoning between two men bound by betrayal and a shared love for the same woman. Beaumont, realizing he was outmatched, fought with a desperate ferocity, driven by fear and a rapidly dwindling hope. He lunged, he parried, he feinted, but Tristan anticipated his every move, his sword a blur of silver in the moonlight. Finally, with a swift, decisive movement, Tristan disarmed Beaumont, his sword clattering to the ground. Beaumont stumbled back, his eyes wide with terror, his chest heaving. Tristan stood over him, his sword pointed at Beaumont's throat, his face a mask of cold fury. You are a traitor, Beaumont, he said, his voice low and menacing. A traitor to your king, a traitor to your betrothed. Beaumont cowered, his bravado gone, replaced by a whimpering fear. Please, Tristan, he begged. Spare me. I was forced into this. I had no choice. There is always a choice, Tristan said, his voice devoid of mercy. You chose to betray your king. You chose to deceive Eleanor. He raised his sword, ready to deliver the final blow. Eleanor, unable to bear the sight, cried out.
Tristan, no.
She shouted. Don't do it. Don't become like them. Tristan hesitated, his sword wavering in the air. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes filled with a conflict that mirrored her own. He was torn between his desire for revenge, his thirst for justice, and the love he still felt for her. He lowered his sword, his chest heaving, his face pale and strained. Get out of here, Beaumont, he said, his voice hoarse. And never come back. If I ever see you again, I will not hesitate to end you. Beaumont, scrambling to his feet, didn't need to be told twice. He fled into the darkness, disappearing into the shadows, leaving Eleanor and Tristan alone with their shattered dreams. Tristan sheathed his sword, his hands trembling. He turned to Eleanor, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain, regret, and shame. I almost killed him, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I almost became a murderer. Eleanor rushed to him, embracing him tightly, her tears flowing freely.
You didn't, Tristan, she said.
You stopped. You chose mercy. He held her close, his body shaking with the aftermath of the violent encounter. I am not the man I was, Eleanor, he said, his voice choked with emotion. The war, the captivity, it changed me. It had scarred me. We all have our scars, Tristan, Eleanor said, her voice soothing. Yours are just more visible. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a love that had endured years of separation, a love that had survived betrayal and violence. She saw the pain in his eyes, the guilt, the self-loathing. It's not just the physical scars, Eleanor, he said, his voice raw with emotion. It's the things I've done, the things I've seen, the darkness I carry inside me. He told her about the horrors he had witnessed, the atrocities he had committed, the compromises he had made to survive. He spoke of the guilt that haunted him, the nightmares that plagued his sleep, the fear that he would never be free from the shadows of his past. Eleanor listened, her heart aching for him. She knew that he was carrying a heavy burden, a burden that threatened to crush him. But she also knew that he was not alone. She was there for him, to share his pain, to help him heal, to love him. You are not alone, Tristan, she said, her voice firm. I am here. We're here. We will face this together. She kissed him, a long, passionate kiss that conveyed all the love, all the hope, all the forgiveness that she felt for him. It was a kiss that healed, a kiss that promised a future, a kiss that defied the darkness. The scars of the past were deep, but so was their love. They would find a way to heal, to rebuild, to reclaim their lives. Together. Chapter 10. A Crown of Thorns. The journey to the capital was fraught with peril. Every shadow seemed to conceal an enemy, every stranger a potential threat. Tristan, his senses honed by years of survival, led them through hidden paths and byways, avoiding the main roads and the watchful eyes of the king's patrols, now likely under the control of the conspirators. Eleanor, though accustomed to the comforts of court life, adapted to the hardships of the journey with surprising resilience, her determination fueled by her love for Tristan and her unwavering loyalty to the king. They traveled mostly at night, resting during the day in secluded forests and abandoned ruins, their conversations hushed, their meals meager. The tension was palpable, the fear of discovery a constant companion. Yet, amidst the danger, a sense of intimacy blossomed between Eleanor and Tristan, a bond forged by shared adversity and a rekindled love. They spoke of their dreams, their fears, their hopes for a future that seemed increasingly uncertain. One evening, as they huddled around a small campfire, Tristan shared a story from his childhood, a tale of a knight who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, not through brute force, but through courage, loyalty, and faith. My father used to tell me that story, Tristan said, his voice soft and nostalgic. He said that true strength lies not in the might of one's arm, but in the purity of one's heart. Eleanor looked at him, her eyes filled with admiration. You are that knight, Tristan, she said. You have faced impossible odds, and you have remained true to yourself. He smiled, a bittersweet smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I try, Eleanor, he said. But I am not sure I always succeed. You do, she insisted. You are the most honorable man I know. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. And you, Eleanor, he said, his voice filled with emotion, are the bravest woman I know. They sat in silence for a long moment, their hands clasped together, their hearts beating as one. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the surrounding trees, the night air filled with the sounds of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. As they neared the capital, the danger increased. They learned from a passing traveler that the king was preparing for a grand tournament, a celebration of his upcoming birthday. It was a perfect opportunity for the conspirators to strike, to assassinate the king and seize control of the realm. Tristan knew they had to act quickly, had to find a way to warn the king before it was too late. But gaining access to the heavily guarded royal court was a daunting task, especially with the conspirators likely controlling the flow of information and access to the king. They decided to seek the help of an old ally, a nobleman named Lord Elmsworth, who had served Tristan's father faithfully and was known for his unwavering loyalty to the crown. Elmsworth's estate was located just outside the capital, a strategic location that could provide them with shelter and access to the city. They arrived at Elmsworth's estate under the cover of darkness, their faces hidden by hooded cloaks. Elmsworth, a grizzled old warrior with a stern face and a kind heart, greeted them with caution, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Tristan revealed their identities and explained their mission, showing Elmsworth the coded documents they had retrieved from Winthorn. Elmsworth listened intently, his expression growing increasingly grim as he realized the extent of the conspiracy. "This is treason of the highest order," he said, his voice filled with anger. "We must warn the king immediately." He agreed to help them, providing them with fresh horses, disguises, and a secret passage that led directly into the royal gardens. It was a risky plan, but it was their only hope. The next day, disguised as humble servants, Eleanor and Tristan entered the capital, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The city was bustling with activity, the streets thronged with people preparing for the tournament. The air was thick with excitement, with anticipation, with a sense of impending doom. They made their way to the royal gardens, the secret passage hidden behind a crumbling fountain. They slipped through the passage, emerging into a lush, fragrant garden, the air filled with the scent of roses and jasmine. But as they approached the palace, they realized that something was wrong. The guards were unusually alert, their faces grim, their weapons drawn. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with suspicion. Suddenly, a voice rang out. "There they are.
Seize them."
They were surrounded by guards, their swords drawn, their faces filled with hostility. They had been betrayed. Again, the crown of thorns was pressing down, sharp and painful, a symbol of the suffering and sacrifice that awaited them. But they would not give up. Not yet. Chapter 11. The Weight of Silence. The guards surged forward, their steel glinting menacingly in the afternoon sun. Tristan, reacting instantly, drew his own sword, its familiar weight a small comfort in the face of overwhelming odds. He positioned himself in front of Eleanor, shielding her from the immediate danger, his eyes scanning the faces of their attackers, searching for any sign of weakness, any hint of hesitation. "Run, Eleanor," he shouted, his voice hoarse with urgency. "Get to the king. Warn him." Eleanor hesitated, her heart torn between her desire to flee and her loyalty to Tristan. She couldn't leave him. Not now, not when he was facing such peril. "I won't leave you," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "You must," Tristan insisted. "You are the only one who can expose them." He parried a blow from one of the guards, the clash of steel echoing through the garden. He fought with a desperate ferocity, his movements fluid and graceful, his every strike aimed to disable, not to kill. He couldn't afford to be reckless, not with Eleanor's life at stake. Eleanor, seeing the determination in his eyes, knew that he was right. She had to get to the king, had to warn him of the conspiracy, even if it meant leaving Tristan behind. She turned and fled, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She ran through the garden, dodging guards, weaving through hedges, her only thought to reach the palace, to save the king. But as she neared the palace entrance, she was intercepted by a figure she recognized: Sir Reginald. He stood blocking her path, his face a mask of cold triumph, his sword drawn. "Going somewhere, my lady?" he sneered. "I think not." Eleanor stopped, her heart sinking. She was trapped, cornered, with no way to escape. You betrayed us," she said, her voice trembling with anger and despair. "Betrayal is a necessary tool, my lady," Reginald said. "In the game of power, there are no rules. Only winners and losers." He lunged at her, his sword whistling through the air. Eleanor, unarmed and untrained in combat, could only cower, shielding her face with her arms, expecting the sharp, searing pain of the blade. But the blow never came. Instead, she heard a cry of pain, a thud, and then silence. She slowly lowered her arms, her eyes widening in disbelief. Reginald lay on the ground, his sword beside him, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. Standing over him, his sword dripping with blood, was Lord Elmsworth. "Are you all right, my lady?" Elmsworth asked, his voice gruff but concerned. Eleanor nodded, her mind reeling.
How did you?
"I followed you," Elmsworth said.
Y suspecta trap.
"I am glad I did." He sheathed his sword, his face grim. "We must hurry, my lady," he said. "There is no time to lose." He led her through a side entrance to the palace, a secret passage known only to a few trusted members of the royal household. They navigated the labyrinthine corridors, their footsteps echoing through the silent halls. Finally, they reached the king's private chambers. Elmsworth knocked on the door, a coded knock that signaled their urgent arrival. The door opened, revealing a young page, his face pale and worried. "Lord Elmsworth," he said, his voice trembling. "The king, he is indisposed." "We must see him," Elmsworth insisted. "It is a matter of utmost importance." The page hesitated, then reluctantly opened the door wider, allowing them to enter. The king's chamber was dimly lit, the curtains drawn, the air thick with the scent of incense and something else, something metallic and unsettling. The king lay in his bed, his face pale and drawn, his breathing shallow and labored. Standing beside him, his hand resting on the king's arm, was the royal physician, a man named Master Corbin. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Corbin demanded, his voice sharp and suspicious. "We must speak to the king," Elmsworth said. "It is a matter of treason." Corbin's eyes narrowed. "The king is ill," he said. "He cannot be disturbed." Eleanor stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "We know about the conspiracy, Master Corbin," she said. "We know about your involvement." Corbin's face went white. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked at the king, then at Elmsworth, then at Eleanor, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. Suddenly, he lunged at Eleanor, his hand reaching for a small vial hidden in his sleeve. Elmsworth, reacting instantly, grabbed Corbin's wrist, preventing him from reaching the vial. "Poison," Elmsworth said, his voice grim. "You are going to finish the job." Corbin struggled against Elmsworth's grip, his face contorted with rage. You cannot stop us," he hissed. "The plan is in motion. The kingdom will fall." The king, stirred by the commotion, opened his eyes. He looked at Eleanor, at Elmsworth, at Corbin, his gaze confused and disoriented. What is happening?" he murmured, his voice weak and raspy. Eleanor knelt beside the king, her heart filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice trembling, "you have been betrayed. There is a conspiracy to assassinate you and seize control of the realm." She told him everything about Tristan's discovery, about Beaumont's involvement, about Reginald's treachery, about Corbin's attempt to poison him. The king listened, his eyes widening in disbelief, then hardening with anger. He struggled to sit up, his face flushed with fury.
"Guards!"
he shouted, his voice gaining strength. "Arrest these traitors." The doors to the chamber burst open, and royal guards rushed in, their swords drawn. They seized Corbin and the remaining conspirators who had been lurking in the shadows, their faces pale and defeated. The weight of silence, the silence of fear, the silence of secrecy, was finally lifted. The truth had been revealed, the conspiracy exposed. But the cost had been high, the wounds deep, and the battle was far from over. It was a heavy crown, and thorns continued. Chapter 12. Echoes of the Fallen. The immediate threat quelled, the palace buzzed with a chaotic energy. The conspirators were imprisoned, awaiting trial and the king's justice. The king, weak but recovering, had ordered a full investigation, determined to root out any remaining threads of the treacherous plot. Eleanor, hailed as a heroine, found herself caught in a whirlwind of activity, attending meetings, answering questions, providing testimony. Yet, amidst the turmoil, her thoughts were consumed by Tristan. He had been captured during the skirmish in the gardens. News of his fate was scarce, filtered through layers of rumor and speculation. Some whispered he was dead, slain by the guards. Others claimed he was imprisoned in the deepest dungeons, awaiting a grim fate. Eleanor refused to believe the worst, clinging to the hope that he was still alive, that she would see him again. She pleaded with the king, with Lord Elmsworth, with anyone who would listen, to learn the truth about Tristan's whereabouts. But the wheels of royal justice turned slowly, and information was tightly controlled. The king, grateful for Eleanor's role in saving his life, promised to do everything in his power to find Tristan, but he also cautioned her to be patient, to trust in the process. Eleanor tried to be patient, tried to trust, but the uncertainty gnawed at her, fueling her anxiety and despair. She spent her days assisting in the investigation, hoping to uncover some clue, some shred of evidence that might lead her to Tristan. She spent her nights sleepless, haunted by nightmares of his capture, his torture, his death. One evening, as she sat alone in her chambers, a small, unassuming figure slipped through the door. Master Thomas, the scribe who had helped them uncover the conspiracy. He looked weary, his face etched with concern, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. "My lady," he said, his voice low and hushed. "I have news of Sir Tristan." Eleanor's heart leaped into her throat. Is he alive?" she asked, her voice trembling. Master Thomas nodded. "He is alive, my lady," he said. "But he is imprisoned. In the Black Tower." The Black Tower. A notorious prison, reserved for the most dangerous criminals, for traitors. The very name sent a shiver of fear down Eleanor's spine. But he is not a traitor," Eleanor said, her voice rising in protest. "He saved the king's life. He exposed the conspiracy." "I know, my lady," Master Thomas said. "But there are those who seek to silence him, to twist the truth to their own advantage." He explained that some of the remaining conspirators, those who had managed to evade capture or maintain a facade of innocence, were spreading rumors, accusing Tristan of being the true mastermind behind the plot, claiming that he had used Eleanor to achieve his own ambitions. They are trying to make him a scapegoat," Master Thomas said.
To protect themselves.
Eleanor felt a surge of anger, of outrage. "We cannot let them do this," she said, her voice firm. We must prove his innocence." "It will not be easy, my lady," Master Thomas said. "They have influence. They control the narrative." He paused, then added, his voice filled with a glimmer of hope. "But there is a way. A trial by combat. A trial by combat. A medieval tradition, a test of strength and skill, where the accused could challenge their accuser to a duel, the outcome determined by God's will." "Tristan, he would have to fight for his life," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. "He would," Master Thomas said. "But it is his only chance."
To clear his name.
To prove his innocence. Eleanor knew that it was a dangerous gamble, a desperate measure. But she also knew that Tristan would never back down from a challenge, that he would fight for his honor, for their future. We must arrange it," Eleanor said, her voice filled with determination. We must find a way." Master Thomas nodded. I will speak to the king," he said. I will use what influence I have." He left, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts, her fears, her unwavering belief in Tristan's innocence. The echoes of the fallen, the whispers of betrayal, the weight of the crown, all seemed to fade into the background, replaced by a single, burning desire to save Tristan, to reclaim their love, to build a future together. And she would move mountains if necessary. The trial was set. Chapter 13. A Dance with Deceit. The news of the impending trial by combat spread like wildfire through the capital, fueling gossip and speculation. Public opinion was divided. Some hailed Tristan as a hero, the man who had saved the king from assassination. Others, influenced by the whispers of the remaining conspirators, viewed him with suspicion, branding him a traitor and a master manipulator. Eleanor, despite her anxiety, threw herself into preparing for the trial. She knew that Tristan's life depended not only on his skill with a blade, but also on swaying public opinion, on convincing the court, and most importantly, the king, of his innocence. She sought out witnesses, gathering testimonies from those who had served with Tristan in the war, from those who had witnessed his bravery and his loyalty. She worked tirelessly with Master Thomas, poring over documents, searching for any evidence that might exonerate Tristan and expose the remaining conspirators. But their efforts were met with resistance, with obstacles at every turn. Witnesses were intimidated, documents disappeared, and the whispers of doubt continued to spread, fueled by the machinations of Tristan's enemies. One evening, as Eleanor was returning to her chambers, she was intercepted by a figure she had hoped never to see again, Lady Annalise, a close confidant of the late Lord Beaumont, and a woman known for her sharp tongue and her even sharper ambition. Lady Eleanor, Annalise said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "How fortunate to see you again." Eleanor stopped, her heart pounding. She knew that Annalise was a dangerous enemy, a woman who would stop at nothing to avenge Beaumont's death and advance her own interests. "Lady Annalise," Eleanor said, her voice calm despite the tremor in her hands. "What do you want?" Annalise smiled, a cold, cruel smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I merely wish to offer my condolences," she said, "on the unfortunate circumstances of your betrothed." "Tristan is not my betrothed," Eleanor said, her voice firm. "And he is innocent." Annalise laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Innocent?"
She scoffed.
"He is a traitor, a murderer. He deserves to die." "He saved the king's life," Eleanor said, her voice rising in anger. "He exposed the conspiracy." "So he claims," Annalise said. "But there are those who believe otherwise. Those who know the truth." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He used you, Eleanor," she said. "He manipulated you. He is a master of deceit." Eleanor felt a surge of doubt, a flicker of uncertainty. Annalise's words were like poison, seeping into her mind, planting seeds of suspicion. "You are lying," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. You are trying to confuse me." Annalise smiled, a triumphant smile. "Am I?"
she said.
"Or am I simply revealing the truth? The truth that you are too blind to see?" She turned to leave, then paused, her hand resting on Eleanor's arm. "Think carefully, Eleanor," she said. "Your loyalty to Tristan could cost you everything." She left, leaving Eleanor shaken and unnerved. Annalise's words, her insinuations, her veiled threats, had hit their mark. Eleanor felt a wave of doubt wash over her, a fear that she was being manipulated, that she was trusting the wrong man. She returned to her chambers, her mind racing. She had to be strong. She had to trust Tristan. But the whispers of doubt, the echoes of deceit, continued to haunt her, threatening to undermine her faith, to shatter her resolve. It was a dance with deceit, a treacherous game of shadows and lies, and Eleanor knew that one wrong step could cost her everything, including the man she loved. The court was a dangerous place, and Annalise's venomous words lingered, planting seeds of mistrust. She had to find a way to counter the lies, to expose the truth, before it was too late. The dance was far from over, and the stakes were higher than ever. Chapter 14. The Lioness at Bay. The weight of Annalise's words pressed down on Eleanor, a suffocating blanket of doubt. She tried to dismiss them, to focus on her preparations for the trial, but the insidious whispers lingered, twisting her thoughts, poisoning her trust. She found herself questioning Tristan's motives, his actions, his love for her. She sought solace in prayer, in the quiet solitude of the royal chapel, but even there, the doubts persisted. She knelt before the altar, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes closed, but the images of Tristan, of Annalise, of the conspirators, danced before her, mocking her faith, her hope. She remembered Tristan's words, his confession of the darkness he carried within him, the things he had done to survive. She remembered his reluctance to reveal the names of the conspirators, his secrecy. Was he truly innocent? Or was he, as Annalise had suggested, a master of deceit, a man who had used her to achieve his own ambitions? The questions tormented her, tearing at her heart, threatening to unravel the fragile threads of her belief. She felt lost, alone, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. She decided to confront Tristan, to demand the truth. She requested a private meeting with him in his cell, a request that was reluctantly granted by the king, who still held a flicker of doubt about Tristan's innocence. The Black Tower was a grim, forbidding place, its stone walls cold and damp, the air thick with a stench of despair. Eleanor was led through a maze of corridors, past rows of cells, the sounds of moans and cries echoing through the darkness. Finally, she reached Tristan's cell. He stood waiting for her, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Eleanor," he said, his voice hoarse. "You came." She looked at him, her heart aching. He looked broken, defeated. The spark of defiance, the fire of determination that she had seen in him before, seemed to have dimmed. "I had to see you, Tristan," she said, her voice trembling. I had to ask you," she hesitated, struggling to find the words, to voice the doubts that had been plaguing her. "Ask me what, Eleanor?" Tristan said, his voice soft. "Ask me anything." She took a deep breath, steeling herself. Are you truly innocent, Tristan?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Or are you hiding something from me?" The question hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Tristan looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and understanding. I have done things in my life that I am not proud of, Eleanor," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "Things that haunt me. But I am not a traitor. I did not betray the king." He told her the full story, the story he had been reluctant to reveal before, the story of his involvement with the conspirators, the reasons behind his secrecy. He had discovered the conspiracy during his captivity, while posing as a sympathizer to gain information and to plan his escape. He had learned the names of the key players, their plans, their ultimate goal. But he had also learned that revealing the names prematurely would be dangerous, not only for him, but for Eleanor. He knew that the conspirators had spies everywhere, that they would stop at nothing to silence anyone who threatened them. He had kept the names secret to protect her, to buy time to gather irrefutable proof, to find a way to expose them without endangering her life. Eleanor listened, her heart slowly filling with a renewed sense of hope, of trust. His words, his sincerity, his love for her, all rang true. I believe you, Tristan," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. I am sorry I doubted you." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "It is all right, Eleanor," he said. I understand. The whispers there, they are powerful." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a love that had endured years of separation, a love that had survived betrayal and doubt. "I will fight for my innocence, Eleanor," he said. I will prove to them that I am not a traitor." "And I will fight with you," Eleanor said, her voice firm. We will expose them. We will win." She was no longer the hesitant, uncertain woman who had entered the Black Tower. She was a lioness at bay, ready to defend her mate, to fight for her future. The doubts were gone, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose, a fierce determination to overcome the obstacles that stood in their way. The dance with deceit was not over, but Eleanor was no longer dancing alone. She had Tristan by her side, and together, They would face the music.
And win.
Chapter 15. Trial by Firelight. The day of the trial by combat dawned cold and gray, mirroring the somber mood that gripped the capital. The courtyard of the royal palace was transformed into an arena, the ground covered with sand, the stands filled with a hushed, expectant crowd. The king, his face pale but resolute, sat on a raised dais, flanked by his advisors and the members of the royal court. Eleanor, dressed in a simple gown of dark blue, stood near the dais, her heart pounding in her chest, her eyes fixed on the entrance to the arena. She had spent the past few days rallying support for Tristan, speaking to nobles, to knights, to anyone who would listen, pleading his case, appealing to their sense of justice, their loyalty to the crown. She had secured the support of Lord Elmsworth and a few other influential nobles, but the majority of the court remained skeptical, swayed by the whispers of the remaining conspirators and the lingering doubts about Tristan's past. The herald announced the commencement of the trial, his voice echoing through the courtyard. Tristan emerged from the entrance, clad in chainmail and leather, his sword at his side, his face grim and determined. He looked magnificent, a warrior ready to face his destiny. His accuser, Sir Kieran, a knight known for his skill with a blade and his ruthless ambition, entered the arena from the opposite side, his armor gleaming in the pale sunlight, his face a mask of cold confidence. Kieran was a puppet of Lady Annalise, chosen for his strength and his willingness to kill. The king rose from his seat, his voice booming across the courtyard. "Let the trial begin," he declared. "May God guide the hand of the righteous." The two knights faced each other, their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. They circled each other, their swords drawn, the tension in the air thick and palpable. The first clash of steel echoed through the courtyard, a sharp, jarring sound that shattered the silence. The fight was fierce and brutal, a dance of death between two skilled warriors. Kieran, driven by ambition and the promise of reward, attacked with a relentless fury, his blows raining down on Tristan like a storm. Tristan, fueled by his desire for justice and his love for Eleanor, defended himself with a calm, calculated precision, parrying Kieran's attacks, conserving his energy, waiting for the right moment to strike. Eleanor watched, her heart in her throat, her breath caught in her chest. Every blow, every parry, every near miss sent a wave of fear and hope through her. She prayed for Tristan, for his strength, for his survival. The fight continued for what seemed like an eternity, the two knights locked in a deadly embrace, their bodies glistening with sweat, their breath coming in ragged gasps. The crowd watched in hushed silence, their faces a mixture of fear, excitement, and awe. Finally, Tristan saw an opening. He feinted to the left, then lunged to the right, his sword flashing in the sunlight, striking Kieran's exposed arm. Kieran cried out in pain, dropping his sword, his arm bleeding profusely. Tristan stood over him, his sword pointed at Kieran's throat, his face a mask of cold determination. "Yield," Tristan said, his voice low and menacing. "Confess your treachery." Kieran, his face pale and contorted with pain, hesitated. He looked at the king, at the crowd, at Lady Annalise, who stood watching from the stands, her face a mask of fury. He knew that if he confessed, he would be condemned as a traitor, his life forfeit. But if he refused, Tristan would kill him. He made his choice. "I yield," he gasped, his voice barely above a whisper.
I confess. I lead.
"Sir Tristan is innocent." A collective gasp went through the crowd. The king rose from his seat, his face a mixture of shock and relief. "What did you say?" the king demanded, his voice booming. Kieran, his voice trembling, repeated his confession, revealing the details of the conspiracy, naming the remaining conspirators, including Lady Annalise. Annalise, her face white with rage and fear, tried to flee, but she was quickly apprehended by the royal guards. The remaining conspirators, their plot exposed, their power broken, were also arrested, their faces pale and defeated. Tristan lowered his sword, his body shaking with exhaustion and relief. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes filled with a love that had endured trials, betrayals, and doubts. Eleanor rushed to him, embracing him tightly, her tears flowing freely. "You did it, Tristan," she said, her voice choked with emotion. You proved your innocence." He held her close, his heart filled with a joy he had not felt in years. The trial by firelight was over. He had won. But more importantly, he had won back Eleanor's trust, her love. And that was everything. The light had won out over darkness. Chapter 16. Between Two Kingdoms. With the conspiracy shattered and Tristan's name cleared, a sense of cautious optimism settled over the court. The king, shaken but resolute, ordered a sweeping reform of the royal administration, purging the remaining corrupt officials and rewarding those who had remained loyal. Tristan, hailed as a hero, was offered a position of high honor in the king's council, a testament to his bravery and his unwavering loyalty. Eleanor, relieved and overjoyed, began to dream of a future with Tristan, a future free from the shadows of the past, a future filled with love, peace, and happiness. She envisioned a life at Winthorne, raising a family, tending to the land, and growing old together. But the scars of the past ran deep, and the path to their happily ever after was not yet clear. The kingdom, weakened by the internal strife, remained vulnerable to external threats, particularly from the Northumbrians, who had been secretly supporting the conspirators in their bid to destabilize their realm. The king, recognizing the danger, decided to strengthen his alliances, to forge a bond with a neighboring kingdom, a kingdom that could provide much-needed military support. He proposed a marriage alliance, a union between himself and the Princess of Mercia, a young woman known for her beauty, her intelligence, and her fierce independence. The proposal was met with mixed reactions. Some saw it as a wise and necessary move, a way to secure the kingdom's borders and deter further aggression. Others, particularly those who had supported Tristan's claim to Eleanor's hand, viewed it as a betrayal, a slight to the man who had saved the king's life. Tristan, though disappointed, accepted the king's decision with grace and dignity. He understood the political realities, the need for stability and security. He knew that his own desires, his love for Eleanor, had to be subordinated to the greater good of the realm. Eleanor, however, was devastated. She had hoped, she had believed that they would finally be together, that their trials and tribulations had earned them a chance at happiness. But now, it seemed, fate had other plans. She confronted the king, pleading with him to reconsider, to allow her to marry Tristan. But the king, though sympathetic, remained firm. He explained that the marriage alliance was crucial, that it was the only way to ensure the kingdom's survival. "I am sorry, Eleanor," he said, his voice filled with regret. But my duty to my people must come first." Eleanor, her heart broken, her dreams shattered, felt a surge of anger, of betrayal. She had sacrificed so much. She had risked everything for the king, for the realm. And now, she was being cast aside. She turned to Tristan, her eyes filled with tears. I cannot do this, Tristan," she said, her voice trembling. I cannot live without you." Tristan looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and sorrow. He understood her pain, her despair. He felt it himself. "I know, Eleanor," he said, his voice soft. But we must be strong. We must do what is right for the kingdom." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Our love, it will endure, Eleanor," he said. It will survive this. It has survived everything else." But even as he spoke the words, he knew that they were not entirely true. The marriage alliance, the separation, the weight of duty, all cast a long shadow over their future, a shadow that threatened to extinguish the flame of their love. They were caught between two kingdoms, between duty and desire, between loyalty and love. And the choice, it seemed, was not theirs to make. They stood at a crossroads. The weight of two kingdoms rested on their shoulders, threatening the fragile hope they had fought so hard to reclaim. Chapter 17. The Unveiling. The royal court buzzed with preparations for the king's impending marriage to the Princess of Mercia. Tapestries were hung, feasts were planned, and envoys scurried back and forth, carrying messages and gifts between the two kingdoms. Eleanor, forced to play the role of the gracious noblewoman, found herself caught in a whirlwind of activity, her heart heavy with a grief she could not express, her smiles masking a pain that gnawed at her soul. Tristan, appointed as the king's representative, was tasked with overseeing the arrangements, ensuring that everything was perfect for the arrival of the Mercian delegation. He performed his duties with his usual efficiency and dedication, but his eyes held a sadness that mirrored Eleanor's, his heart aching with a love that seemed destined to remain unfulfilled. They met in secret, whenever they could, stealing moments together in the quiet corners of the palace, the gardens, the library. They spoke of their past, of their lost future, of the pain of their separation. I cannot bear to see you marry another," Eleanor confessed one evening, as they stood together on the castle walls, watching the sun set over the distant hills. It breaks my heart." Tristan reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of her jawline. "I know, Eleanor," he said, his voice soft. And it breaks mine too. But we must be strong. We must endure." "But for how long, Tristan?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. How long must we sacrifice our happiness for the sake of the kingdom?" Tristan didn't answer. He didn't know the answer. He only knew that his love for Eleanor was the one constant in his life, the one thing that gave him strength, the one thing that made him whole. As the day of the Mercian delegation's arrival drew near, a sense of unease settled over the court. Rumors circulated of unrest in Mercia, of factions opposed to the marriage alliance, of plots to sabotage the union. The king, concerned for the safety of his bride-to-be, ordered increased security, tightening the guard around the palace and dispatching scouts to patrol the borders. The Mercian delegation arrived amidst a flurry of trumpets and banners, their colorful attire a stark contrast to the somber mood of the court. The Princess of Mercia, a young woman named Isolde, was beautiful, with fiery red hair and piercing green eyes. She carried herself with a regal bearing, her head held high, her gaze unwavering. But as Eleanor watched Isolde, she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. There was a sadness in Isolde's eyes, a reluctance in her smile, a hidden pain that mirrored her own. During the formal welcoming ceremony, as Isolde stood beside the king, accepting the greetings of the court, Eleanor saw her glance at Tristan. And in that glance, Eleanor saw recognition, a flicker of something that looked like love. Eleanor's mind raced. Could it be? Could Isolde and Tristan, could they have a past? She sought out Master Thomas, the scribe who had helped her uncover the conspiracy. She asked him to make inquiries, to investigate Isolde's background, to uncover any connection she might have to Tristan. Master Thomas, ever discreet and efficient, returned a few days later with startling news. "My lady," he said, his voice low and hushed. I have discovered something that may change everything." He explained that Isolde was not who she seemed to be. She was not the true Princess of Mercia. She was a decoy, a stand-in, sent to protect the real princess from harm. And the real Princess of Mercia? She was being held captive by a rebellious faction within Mercia, a faction that opposed the marriage alliance and sought to seize control of the kingdom. But there was more. The leader of this faction, my lady, Master Thomas said, his voice trembling. He is a knight. A knight who once served the king of Northumbria. A knight who was believed to be dead. He paused, then added, his voice barely above a whisper, Sir Gareth of Lyonesse. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Gareth? Alive? But Tristan had killed him. Or so he had believed. The unveiling was complete. The truth, like a shattered mirror, reflected a reality far more complex, far more dangerous than Eleanor had ever imagined. And it was far from over. The pieces were falling into place, but the puzzle was still incomplete, and the stakes were higher than ever. Chapter 18. A Knight's Reckoning. The revelation of Gareth's survival sent shockwaves through Eleanor's world. The carefully constructed narrative of the past, of Tristan's captivity and escape, crumbled before her, replaced by a chilling uncertainty. Had Tristan lied? Had he been complicit in Gareth's deception all along? Or was he, too, a victim of a far more intricate and sinister plot? She confronted Tristan, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and betrayal. She recounted Master Thomas's findings, her voice trembling with emotion, her eyes searching his for any sign of guilt, any hint of deception. Tristan listened, his face paling with each word, his eyes widening in disbelief. He denied any knowledge of Gareth's survival, any involvement in the Mercian deception. He swore his innocence, his love for Eleanor, his unwavering loyalty to the king. But this time, Eleanor found it difficult to believe him. The doubts, fueled by Gareth's reappearance and Isolde's mysterious connection to Tristan, gnawed at her, eroding her trust, threatening to shatter the fragile bond that had survived so much. "How can I believe you, Tristan?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion. How can I trust you when everything I thought I knew is a lie?" Tristan reached out to her, but she recoiled, unable to bear his touch, her heart aching with a pain that was almost unbearable. "Eleanor, please," he pleaded, his voice raw with desperation. You must believe me. I would never lie to you. I love you." "Love?" Eleanor scoffed, her voice bitter. "Is that what you call it? Deceit? Betrayal? How can I know what is real and what is a fabrication?" Tristan, stung by her words, stepped back, his face a mask of pain and resignation. He knew that he had lost her trust, that the shadow of doubt had consumed her. I understand your doubts, Eleanor," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. But I swear to you on my honor, on my life, I am innocent." He turned and walked away, leaving Eleanor alone with her shattered beliefs, her broken heart. She spent the next few days in a daze, her mind reeling from the weight of the revelations, her emotions a chaotic storm of anger, betrayal, and a lingering, stubborn love for Tristan. She avoided him, unable to face him, unable to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the possibility of his deception. She sought counsel from Mother Agnes, pouring out her heart to the wise abbess, seeking guidance, seeking solace. Mother Agnes listened patiently, her expression calm and serene, her eyes filled with a deep understanding that went beyond mere sympathy. "My child," she said when Eleanor had finished, "the path of love is rarely smooth. It is often fraught with trials, with tribulations. But it is also the path of truth. You must follow your heart, Eleanor. You must listen to your intuition." "But my heart is broken, Mother," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. "And my intuition, it tells me to distrust him." "Distrust is a natural response to betrayal, my child," Mother Agnes said. But it is not always the right response. Sometimes we must have faith. We must trust, even when it seems impossible." She paused, then added, her voice filled with a gentle wisdom. "Look deeper, Eleanor. Look beyond the surface. Look into Tristan's heart. And you will find the truth." Mother Agnes' words resonated with Eleanor, stirring something deep within her, a flicker of hope amidst the darkness. She realized that she had judged Tristan too quickly, that she had allowed her fears and doubts to cloud her judgment. She decided to investigate further, to seek out the truth for herself, to uncover the full extent of Gareth's plot and Tristan's role in it. She returned to Master Thomas, asking him to continue his inquiries, to delve deeper into Gareth's past, to uncover any connection he might have had with Tristan before their supposed encounter in the Saracen lands. Master Thomas, though hesitant to involve himself further in such a dangerous game, agreed to help. He understood Eleanor's desperation, her need for answers. He returned a few days later, with a shocking discovery. "My lady," he said, his voice hushed and urgent. I have found something that will change everything." He revealed that Tristan and Gareth had, in fact, known each other before the war. They had been rivals, competing for the same woman's affections, a woman named Isolde. Not the stand-in, but the real princess. The rivalry had turned bitter, fueled by jealousy and ambition. Gareth, consumed by hatred for Tristan, had vowed revenge. He had orchestrated Tristan's capture during the war, intending to kill him. But Tristan had escaped, with the help of Isolde, who had secretly loved him all along. Gareth, enraged by Tristan's escape and Isolde's betrayal, had fled to Northumbria, where he had plotted his revenge, using the marriage alliance as a means to destroy both Tristan and the kingdom. The truth, like a blinding light, illuminated the darkness, revealing the full extent of Gareth's treachery and Tristan's innocence. It was Tristan's turn for reckoning. He was vindicated, and his oath, though strained, remained unbroken. But the reckoning was far from complete. Chapter 19. The Heart's Citadel. The pieces of the puzzle finally fell into place, revealing a tapestry woven with threads of betrayal, revenge, and a love that had endured years of hardship and deception. Eleanor, overwhelmed with relief and remorse, realized the terrible mistake she had made, the injustice she had inflicted upon Tristan. She had doubted him, accused him, rejected him, all based on a lie, a carefully constructed deception orchestrated by Gareth. She rushed to find Tristan, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. She found him in the castle gardens, standing alone by the crumbling fountain, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, his face etched with a sadness that mirrored the pain she had caused him. "Tristan," she said, her voice trembling. I know the truth. I know everything." He turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and a lingering hurt. He didn't speak, didn't move. He simply waited. Eleanor recounted Master Thomas's findings, her voice choked with emotion, her eyes filled with tears. She told him about Gareth's past, his rivalry with Tristan, his plot for revenge. I am so sorry, Tristan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I doubted you. I accused you. I broke your heart." Tristan listened, his expression slowly changing from sadness to a flicker of understanding. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers gently caressing hers. "It is all right, Eleanor," he said, his voice soft. I understand. The deception was masterful. I almost doubted myself." Eleanor looked at him, her eyes filled with a love that had been tested, a love that had survived. Can you ever forgive me, Tristan?" she asked, her voice trembling. He smiled, a bittersweet smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. There is nothing to forgive, Eleanor," he said. You were a victim of Gareth's treachery, just as I was." He pulled her close, embracing her tightly, his body shaking with emotion. "I love you, Eleanor," he said, his voice raw with feeling. I have always loved you. And I will always love you." Eleanor held him close, her tears flowing freely, her heart overflowing with a joy she had not felt in what seemed like an eternity. She had found her way back to him, back to the love that had sustained her through the darkness. But their reunion, though sweet, was not without its challenges. The threat of Gareth remained, and the fate of the real princess Isolde hung in the balance. They knew that they had to act quickly, to rescue Isolde, and to stop Gareth before he could unleash his plan to destabilize the kingdom. They devised a daring plan that involved infiltrating the Northumbrian stronghold where Isolde was being held captive. It was a risky undertaking, a gamble that could cost them their lives. But they were ready. They were united, their love a shield against the dangers that lay ahead. They gathered their allies, Lord Elmsworth, Master Thomas, and a small band of loyal knights, men who had proven their loyalty and their courage. They set out under the cover of darkness, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. They were on a mission to save a princess, to defeat a traitor, and to reclaim their future. The Heart's citadel, fortified by love and trust, was ready to withstand any siege. They were prepared to fight for what was right and for each other. It was time to go to war. Chapter 20. Threads of Destiny. The journey to Northumbria was perilous, the landscape harsh and unforgiving, the threat of discovery ever present. Eleanor and Tristan, riding side by side, drew strength from each other's presence, their shared love a beacon in the encroaching darkness. They spoke little, their communication often limited to a shared glance, a brief touch, a silent understanding that transcended words. They reached the Northumbrian stronghold, a formidable fortress perched high on a cliff overlooking the sea, its walls seemingly impenetrable, its defenses formidable. Gareth, anticipating their arrival, had prepared for a siege, his forces well equipped and ready for battle. But Eleanor and Tristan had not come to lay siege. Their plan was more subtle, more daring. They intended to infiltrate the fortress, to rescue Isolde, and to capture Gareth, all under the cover of darkness. With the help of Master Thomas's contacts within Northumbria, they had secured a secret passage, a forgotten tunnel that led directly into the heart of the stronghold. It was a risky maneuver, a gamble that could cost them their lives. But they were prepared to take the risk. Under the cloak of a moonless night, they entered the tunnel, their footsteps muffled by the damp earth, their hearts pounding in their chests. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay, the darkness absolute, the silence broken only by the drip of water and the occasional scuttling of rats. They navigated the labyrinthine passage, guided by Master Thomas's intricate instructions, their senses on high alert, their every movement cautious and deliberate. They knew that one wrong step, one careless sound, could betray their presence and lead to their capture. Finally, they reached the end of the tunnel, emerging into a dimly lit chamber within the fortress. They were inside. They found Isolde imprisoned in a small, sparsely furnished cell, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and a flicker of hope. She recognized Tristan instantly, her face lighting up with a faint smile. "Tristan," she whispered, her voice hoarse. You came. "We came to rescue you, Isolde," Tristan said, his voice soft. We will get you out of here." They quickly freed Isolde from her bonds, their movements swift and efficient. But as they prepared to leave, they were confronted by Gareth. He stood blocking their path, his face a mask of cold fury, his sword drawn, his eyes blazing with hatred. You will not escape, Tristan," he snarled. This time you will die." Tristan stepped forward, his own sword drawn, his face grim and determined. "I am not afraid of you, Gareth," he said, his voice steady. Your reign of terror is over." The two knights clashed, their swords ringing out in the confined space, the sound echoing through the fortress. The fight was fierce and brutal, a culmination of years of rivalry, of hatred, of a struggle for love and for power. Eleanor and Isolde watched, their hearts in their throats, their breath caught in their chests. They knew that the fate of the kingdom, the fate of their future, rested on the outcome of this final battle. Tristan, fueled by his love for Eleanor and his desire for justice, fought with a skill and a ferocity that Gareth could not match. He parried Gareth's blows, he countered his attacks, he pressed him relentlessly, forcing him back, step by step. Finally, with a swift, decisive movement, Tristan disarmed Gareth, his sword clattering to the ground. Gareth stumbled back, his eyes wide with terror, his chest heaving. Tristan stood over him, his sword pointed at Gareth's throat, his face a mask of cold determination. "It is over, Gareth," he said, his voice low and menacing. Your treachery ends here." But before Tristan could deliver the final blow, a figure emerged from the shadows, Lady Annalise. She had followed them. She had evaded the guards. She had come to finish what Gareth had started. She lunged at Tristan, a dagger in her hand, her eyes blazing with madness and a desperate desire for revenge. Eleanor, reacting instantly, stepped in front of Tristan, shielding him with her own body. The dagger plunged into her shoulder, a sharp, searing pain that made her cry out. Tristan, enraged, turned and struck Annalise down, his sword ending her life in a single, swift blow. He rushed to Eleanor's side, his heart filled with terror, his hands trembling. "Eleanor,"
he cried.
Are you all right?" Eleanor, her face pale and contorted with pain, managed a weak smile. I am fine, Tristan," she said, her voice hoarse. It is just a scratch." But it was not just a scratch. The wound was deep, and she was losing blood rapidly. Tristan, his eyes filled with tears, ripped a strip of cloth from his tunic and bandaged her wound, his hands gentle and surprisingly skilled. They escaped the fortress, with Isolde's help, leaving Gareth to face the king's justice, the threads of destiny finally weaving together, a tapestry of victory, of justice, of a love that had conquered all. The reckoning was complete. But one final thread remained. Eleanor's life hung in the balance. Epilogue. The escape from Northumbria was a blur of frantic movement and desperate hope. Tristan, carrying Eleanor in his arms, led the small band through the secret passage and back to the waiting horses. They rode through the night, pursued by Gareth's forces, their every breath a prayer, their every heartbeat a testament to their will to survive. They reached the border, crossing into friendly territory just as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon. Eleanor, weak and fading, clung to consciousness, her hand clasped tightly in Tristan's, her eyes fixed on his face, her love for him a lifeline in the encroaching darkness. They were taken to a nearby monastery, a place of healing and refuge, where the monks tended to Eleanor's wound with skill and compassion. The dagger, it turned out, had been poisoned, a final act of malice, by the vengeful Annalise. Tristan never left Eleanor's side, watching over her, praying for her recovery, his heart heavy with guilt and fear. He blamed himself for her injury, for putting her in danger, for the years of hardship she had endured because of him. Days turned into nights, and nights into days. Eleanor's condition remained precarious, her life hanging by a thread. The monks worked tirelessly, using all their knowledge of herbs and remedies, but the poison was strong, its effects devastating. One evening, as Tristan sat beside Eleanor's bed, holding her hand, her eyes fluttered open. She looked at him, her gaze weak, but filled with a love that transcended pain and suffering. "Tristan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I am here, Eleanor," he said, his voice choked with emotion. I am here. I love you, Tristan," she said, her voice fading. I have always loved you. "And I love you, Eleanor," he said, his tears flowing freely. More than words can say." She smiled, a faint, ethereal smile that lit up her face. We found our way back to each other," she whispered. That is all that matters." Her hand went limp in his, her breathing stopped, her eyes closed. She was gone. Tristan cried out in anguish, his grief a raw, visceral pain that tore at his soul. He had lost her. He had lost his love, his life, his everything. But as he held her lifeless body in his arms, he felt a warmth, a presence, a sense of peace that transcended his grief. He knew that Eleanor was not truly gone. She was with him, in his heart, in his memories, in the love that they had shared. He buried her in the monastery garden, beneath a sprawling oak tree, her grave marked by a simple stone, inscribed with her name and a single word, beloved. He spent the rest of his days serving the king, honoring Eleanor's memory by dedicating his life to justice, to peace, to the ideals that they had both fought for. He never married, never loved another. Eleanor remained the one true love of his life, the woman who had captured his heart, the woman who had saved his soul. And as he grew old, he often visited Eleanor's grave, sitting beneath the oak tree, talking to her, sharing his thoughts, his dreams, his sorrows. He knew that she was listening, that she was with him, always. Their love, like the threads of a finely woven tapestry, had endured trials, betrayals, and even death itself. It was a love that transcended time and in space, a love that would live on forever in the hearts of those who remembered them. Their destiny was fulfilled. Epilogue.